Hello everybody, Joe the Lawyer here, and thanks for watching. Hey guys, so recently I released a big video. It was pretty big, like 3.5 hours, and it was my deep dive into all aspects of the OSR, like every aspect of it, every little part of it. And it's gotten a great reception, but I realized that, 3.5 hours is pretty big for most people to sit there, even though it's broken up into chapters. So I had an idea, maybe I'll just put this out in pieces. That each main part has a separate piece, and that way people can sort of digest it at their own pace. I don't have to worry about listening to a big long video, essentially. And by listen, I mean because I just talk and show these cool black and white art pictures from old school D&D, so I don't have to watch or anything. But I thought it might be a good idea because there's a lot of people recently who got into the OSR, or were looking to get into the OSR, and they came from a 5e experience, and maybe they watched some YouTubers like Matt Mercer, Matt Colville, GDD, and and that's their experience, and they're hearing about this OSR thing from the sidelines, and they're like, what is it? I want to check it out. And so basically, I figured let me do this big video, and now I'm breaking it up into pieces for you. So. You're going to hear a lot of references to things, boards or blogs or links to this or that, and maybe references to products. I have a link page for everything I talk about, so you guys don't have to take notes at all or anything like that. All right, so just click. The link page is included in the description here, as well as a link to the big video if you want to just listen to this thing all the way through. I'm dropping it in like 13 chunks, I think it'll be. So feel free to take a look at that. And one really important thing, guys, is I got a little contest going with Eric Tankar. Whoever gets to 5,000 subs first, the other guy, the other guys got to buy a steak dinner and donate $100 to their favorite charity. So I definitely want to win a steak dinner because I'm doing the Atkins diet, damn it, and I like steak. So anyway, guys, if you could like and subscribe and share it around, I really appreciate it. That would go a long way toward helping me beat them. I would really appreciate that. So without further ado, enjoy the video, guys. Alright guys, so now the actual OSR games, the games that make up the OSR, alright, they're many and varied. Now remember that blog post I was telling you about the history of this? I think he did really the best breakdown I've ever seen about the different core groups of types of games that people make, that they put in the OSR umbrella. I'm going to read a little bit from this literally because he really summarized it nice. And I'll get into what each one of them is later. And he calls the first one the classic OSR. It's the first wave. They're the most compatibility. They keep to the core principles of old school gaming, mostly the Retroclones for the most part, right? And then he calls the next category OSR adjacent. All right, and the OSR adjacent game, by the way, this is in part 5 of his review of historical look at the OSR. The OSR adjacent games have a lot of same principles, a bunch of them, and some compatibility with the old school games. But it's like, for example, it's like DCC RPG, right? It's a little bit gonzo, keeps a lot of the principles of the OSR, takes it in more of a gonzo direction. Some compatibility, like back in the Flail Snails days, I could actually play a AD&D guy in a DCC game with some tinkering around the edges there to make it a little more, suited so he's not overpowered, or vice versa, right? So it had a lot of compatibility and same principles. And then the next one he called the new OSR, the NSR, I think he calls it, the New School Revolution. And it's, as he describes it, games are like, they feel like there's some valuable principles to be learned from old school D&D, or that some of the concept of the framework of old school dungeoneering is interesting, but that specific rules aren't needed. The old D&D rules aren't needed. And you can't really play D&D as per se with these games. I don't like these games. This is a game like, for example, Mork Bork, right? Not my kind of game. Dungeon World, something like that. Karn. A lot of people like Karn, C-A-I-R-N, Karn, whatever you call it. Those sorts of games. They're very different. They keep some of the principles, but they're not cross-compatible. You can't, a good DM could always, mess with something and make it cross-compatible to anything, but they're a little bit more difficult, right? It's a look and feel thing is different. The vibe is different. Some of the principles are there, though. And then the last category he calls commercial OSR. He says this, I like how he phrases this. This is the realm of the grifters and the lazy. When I say that this branch has no principles, I mean more than just gameplay. This is not a community or a coherent set of games, but simply a grouping I used to lump everyone who adds an OSR search tag on their shitty shovelware Drive-Thru RPG. They are products, often originally 5th edition in nature, that are or can be converted to old school D&D with some minimal effort, and so are advertised as OSR. They have absolutely nothing old school about them besides a D&D mechanical based on some kind of usually generic fantasy setting. You can see a few of these a month being reviewed on 10-Foot Pole, which is another blog I didn't link to because I don't like the guy that much. And the unifying theme is how much writers of these projects simply do not get it. Rather than rule sets, the commercial OSR is almost entirely rooted in modules. I agree. They have minimal treasure for proper gold for XP games, lots of set piece and often carefully balanced combat encounters a la 5th edition, oceans of read aloud text dictating player actions, and minimal player agency in general, but might be set in a dungeon or have orcs or something, and so the designer slaps the OSR tag on it in hopes of higher sales. Yeah, so that's it. That's what they're talking about there for commercial OSR. I'm not going to talk about any of that crap because fuck them. All right, and this is just an OSR video, and again, fuck them. Right, so that's a good overview of the broadly speaking of the different types of games. But now for a bit of a deeper dive. Got to start with the Retroclones because Matt Finch, like I said, the godfather of the OSR, he started the whole thing going. I think he's the first one, along with Gonnerman, who made Basic Fantasy RPG. Chris Gonnerman. I think Gonnerman might have published his game first, Basic Fantasy, BFRPG, before Osric. Matt Finch and Stuart Marshall worked on Osric. And what they had the idea was the same thing as Gonnerman, that they could use the 3rd edition open game license, the OGL, which was a lot of fame lately for this 5th edition OGL, right? The 3rd edition OGL was the basis of the entire Retroclone movement. They decided, hey, you know what? There's a lot of shit in here that we could use for the OGL that if we could basically remake AD&D. And that way we could say, like for example, Swords and Wizardry or Osric, which later came to be. Osric stands for Old School Reference and Index Compendium or some shit like that. It's basically supposed to be an AD&D clone with just the rules so that you could. The goal was, I need a rule set out there that I could publish an adventure, a module for, but I can't advertise that it's AD&D compatible or something like that. But I want to publish this adventure, so let's make this Osric rule set just so I can say Osric compatible. Since it's Osric compatible, it'll be compatible broadly with any goddamn game about, from the old days, right? Any old school game. And so Matt Finch came, and what he decided to do, being a lawyer, and I think it was an intellectual property lawyer, so he knew his shit. He decided we're going to publish this crap in England. And so Stuart Marshall lived in England. They got it together. They published it out there because it's harder to sue in England, right? And I think you have different rules in England. If you lose the lawsuit, you got to pay costs and expenses, all right? So he said, let's do it, and let's drop it out in England and see what happens. It's a ballsy move that paid off because they may have gotten threatening letters of, cease and desist or whatever, but nothing came of it. And they ignored it, and boom, here we go. Osric is out there now, right? And so everybody's like holding their breath. Like, what's going to happen? I remember talking to people who were publishing for like Pathfinder and whatnot back then over on the N-World, and we're talking about everybody's watching what happens with Osric. The entire gaming industry is watching what happens with Osric because it was the biggest. It was bigger than BFRPG, really, and Matt Finch was behind it. So he was kind of well known, right? So people were really trying to see what happens because this could really change the entire RPG scene, and it didn't. It did change it. It really, really did. Osric stayed, and so other people were like, shit, there's an AD&D clone. I'm going to make a clone of blah, 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 right? And so then you had other ones, right? So you had, before I get into the clones, I got to get into a couple special mentions here. First, Castles and Crusades. I like this game. I don't like their skill system, which is their siege engine, but I like the game. It's basically AD&D D20ified, all right? And they were around early. I think maybe even before Osric. They used the OGL as well. And so I think it was a fantastic game, and you guys should get it. Over COVID and later, I just keep buying everything they put out because it's good quality stuff, and they deserve to be supported. And then there's another one called Hackmaster. I guess here's the weird thing that happened with Hackmaster. Kenzer and Company had, cartoons or something that they hadn't published in Dragon magazine or something like that. And when Dragon went on CDs, because back in the days you want to get all copies of Dragon magazines, you could buy this CD that already scanned in, blah blah blah. Here you got the whole collection. I guess there was some kind of a lawsuit, from what I understand, because Kenzer was like, hey, we gave you the rights to publish that shit in the book, not in a CD. And so as a settlement, they got to publish a rule book and modules for, they called it Hackmaster. It was a mocking version, a satire version of AD&D. but they would publish Against the Giants, but a satire version of it, right? So it was kind of fun and funny. And later they came out with Hackmaster Basic. It's Hackmaster Basic is kind of a funky system, weird initiative system, but worth checking out. But that was the Hackmaster thing. So honorable mention to Castles and Crusades and Hackmaster. They weren't technically retro clones in a sense that what we're talking about here, but they were definitely good and important. So as far as retro clones go, we're going in order, I guess. Matt Finch has Swords and Wizardry Complete. That is a retro clone of the ODD books, the original D&D. There's Swords and Wizardry Core, and then there's Swords and Wizardry Complete. All right, and that is where he basically just said, I'm going to take OD&D plus the supplements, which I didn't get into. There were several supplements, I think Greyhawk, Black Mortis, and that, which added more rules. If you look at all the ODD books and all the supplements that came out for it, you see what was later AD&D. It was the foundation for AD&D. So Swords and Wizardry Complete, which he just had a new version come out, the best that I've ever seen, actually. Get the newest one over on his website, Mythmere Games. That is the core rules plus all the supplements. It's AD&D light, I guess I'd like to call it, right? So that is Swords and Wizardry Complete is your ODD clone. Labyrinth Lord was the first BX clone that came out. Everybody was playing that back in the day. Everybody played it. And they had the Advanced Companion, which had new stuff. It was a fun game, and I think there's a second edition out now, so I got the link in there for it, revised edition. All right. As far as the Homes edition, which came before BX, you have something called Blue Home. Good game, simple, straightforward. Homes Edition goes. You can't really. Homes Edition was straightforward enough as it was, right? So you can check that out. And Osric again for AD&D. I've linked that out already before. You can take a look at that. And then we have second edition. There's a second edition clone which I never knew about until I started running a second edition game a year and a half ago called For Gold and Glory. It's a good game. It's a retro clone of second edition. They took some liberties and made some choices about what they're going to include and maybe translated some difficult things that had contradictions in there, but it's worthy, and it's good looking as a point of reference, right? If you can't understand what's the spell, how should it work, maybe check Golden Glory and get their interpretation of it, right? So those were the original retro clones, and they were pumping along for a few years. And then this maniac named James Raggi came along and said, you know what, I'm going to take this fucking retro clone base, this foundation. I think he did Labyrinth Lord as his base, and he says, I'm going to do something different with it. I'm going to break the mold. I'm going to make this weird, creepy, horror, crazy-ass RPG called Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Now, I think that was the name of his old metal. He was hugely into heavy metal, death metal, whatever. And I think that was the name of his metal blog. And I think the Flame Princess part comes from because he had a crush on some redheaded girl. So, I don't know. So that's, I think, maybe like Charlie Brown, right? He had a crush on a redheaded girl. Unlike Charlie Brown, Raggi has a full fucking head of hair like me. More than me, actually. So, down to his back. So anyway, he came up with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which was a very awesome and different take on the retro clone system. And people were like, Jesus, we're not limited to just retro clones. We're not just stuck playing these old games the way they were with the old rules, just, newly interpreted. Oh my God, let's just try this thing. So that's what he did. He basically, put it out there into the world. It was fucking fantastic. So he did that, and it opened up a whole new avenue for everybody to put out games. And all of a sudden people were dropping, the retro clones. You could throw a rock and hit one, a retro clone, a subtle interpretation of, Microlight 74, blah, blah, blah. It was a subtle interpretation of the retro clones, the predominant ones, but Raggi broke the mold with that shit. And so soon there's a lot of new ones came to be. And this is where we're getting into, the ones I was talking about before, from the blog, the Simulacrum, where he was talking about, they're not classic OSR. They're clones, but they also have some more genetic material in there. Like Crypts and Things has a focus on swords and sorcery. Lamentations, emphasis on horror and late Renaissance, early Enlightenment elements, and this and that, right? So that's what he's talking about there. So these are kind of fun, and they're still being developed today. Right now, I would break these games, because I can't call them retro clones anymore, because they're different interpretations of old school games, using most of the old school elements and just take it in a different direction, like Raggi did, right? So you have, I think, two categories of these games. One, rules light, and one has more intensive rule sets, all right? So the big ones right now, all right? The big one, the game I'm playing in every Monday with Tim is called Shadow Dark. That is the biggest. That is the biggest game, I think, other than Old School Essentials. Old School Essentials is the it used to be called BX Essentials. Now it's Old School Essentials. It basically is from Necrotic Gnome, and it's the best layout of the old BX games. For some reason, the Labyrinth Lord guy, he just stopped doing his shit with Labyrinth Lord, and BX Old School Essentials just took over, and he came up with the best layout I've ever seen. The one that everybody's copying, and I think Shadow Dark copied that as well. So kudos to Old School Essentials. You did a hell of a job. Shadow Dark is the one everybody's sort of like, playing now. It's the latest shiny, because honestly, it's a great game. It had a great writer who was really marketing this thing well, and her wife was an amazing business person, so they did everything the right way, and it happened to be dropped around the same time that everybody was pissed off at Wizards of the Coast for their 5e OGL debacle that happened, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years ago, whatever it was. So yeah, it dropped at the same time, and it like hit $1 million or more on their Kickstarter. It was fucking fantastic. Another one is Deathbringer, Professor Dungeon Master over there at Dungeon Craft, the YouTube channel. He has an abbreviated version. He's a cool fucking dude. I met with him, had a few beers with him multiple times, and he gave me a copy of his original one. He's working on a longer version, I believe. Knave, Ben Milton of Questing Beast put out Knave, and I think there's a Knave 2nd edition now. Again, all these links are in their description, guys. Black Hack is another one. 5 Torches Deep. Savage World's been around for a bit. I think it could definitely be classified as a rules light game, though. Blood and Treasure, that's another one written by the guy who created Nod. Nod was a zine. We'll get into zines in a little bit. Nod is a zine that was amazing. This guy had more creativity in his fucking left pinky than I do my whole body. He just keeps writing and writing and writing. It's amazing. There's one called Low Fantasy Gaming that borders between rules light and rules heavy. I'm not sure where to categorize it. Get it yourself and check it out. And then I mentioned Karn before. Karn, whatever you say it. Yeah, that's out there. I'm not sure if it's quite, but everybody's playing it, it seems like. I'm not sure if it's quite OSR or not. I don't know enough, but I'll include it just in case. You guys can check it out and see, right? And then my friend Eric Tankar came up when he does a lot of work with Frog God Games. He came up with something called Swords and Wizardry Light and Swords and Wizardry Continual Light. I think the light version was mainly made just to have a quick and easy convention game. You could, here's the rules. It's a 4-page long rule set. Here's the basic characters. Here's all you need to know. You don't need to know too much. You dive into it, and boom, you just get playing, right? And then Continual Light was an expansion of that. Again, all those links are on the link page. As for the more rule-intensive rule sets, you're looking at, first one is Joe Block, Greyhawk Ragnar. The guy knows more about Greyhawk than I'll ever know. He came up with something called Adventures Dark and Deep. ADD, you get it? And he just finished up the 2nd edition, the Kickstarter. You can get on the Drive-Thru Games, and there's a link there to Drive-Thru RPG and get his games. His BRW Games is his name. He has a lot of modules, a lot of stuff that's set in Greyhawk, but the serial numbers, shaved off a little bit. Although I just heard that you can now publish on Drive-Thru for Greyhawk or something. I'm not sure. I got to dive into that and see what's going on, but I'm sure he's going to jump on it if he can. He also has a huge mega dungeon out there, Castle of the Mad Archmage, the biggest mega dungeon out that I've perhaps seen. You can check him out, and he just finished his 2nd edition of Adventures Dark and Deep, but you could buy his older 1st edition stuff at his mega dungeon on the webpage. Another one is Jeff Talanian came up with Hyperborea. The original name of this thing was Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. Now, while Joe Block's book is basically the 2nd edition AD&D that Gary Gygax always talked about making, and Joe went back and scoured the entire fucking internet and everything Gary ever said about the 2nd edition game that he was designing, and Joe took all those elements and said, I'm going to make that game, right? And he put it out there. And so he's got a whole lot of different classes and a lot more detail. And I think it's a fine game. It's a really, really good game. I have every book that he's ever published on my shelf right now. I'm looking at them right now. Now, what Jeff Talanian did was he decided, you know what? I'm going to go to Swords and Sorcery route. I'm going to Conan. I'm going to Fritz Leiber. I'm going to Michael Moorcock, Zelric stuff. I'm going to, a little bit of horror in there too. And he really just decided he's gonna take it in a different direction, more old school. So he created this game called first Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers Hyperborea. Now it's just called Hyperborea, and it's great. It's a great game. It's my opinion a true Swords and Sorcery version of second edition D&D, but it's his own because it's not only is it a rule set. is inherent in its creation. It has a setting, which is kind of cool. And what I'm going to do someday, actually, believe it or not, years from now, once I get it all done, I'm gonna do it the same way Jeff did. It's a fantastic thing, and he puts out good modules, and it's really good stuff. Another one, Ambition and Avarice by my friend Greg Christopher. He put out his own game. It's on his second edition now, and you could click on that link there. It's rules heavy, simple game, but it's easy to understand. But it's thick. It's a big book. It's basically, when I look at the rules heavy rule sets, basically if you held it in front of your chest and a guy shot you, you wouldn't die. I guess that's how I define them, right? So a big one that's popping now. It's, in fact, Greg is playing a lot of this. He's not even playing his own game as much as he's playing Adventurer Conqueror King. They just finished their Kickstarter for the second edition. I linked to the first one, the first edition there. So I'm waiting eagerly. I have the PDF for it, but I don't like to read my first read of a game system on PDF. I want to sit down with the book on the couch and just start diving into this thing. But hopefully it comes soon. Adventurer Conqueror King was one of the first, along with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, the first edition of it, was one of the first big ones to make it big out there. It took a different interpretation of it, of classes and races and all that, and how they developed, and it really did a good job. And as the name describes, you start out as an adventurer, then you become a conqueror, then you become a king. It's sort of like the Conan route through life, right? So he was an adventurer, then he conquered lands, and then became a king. And so it starts out with, like, dungeon crawls and kicking ass, and then you conquer a region, and then they have rules in there for how to rule the region you conquer. Like, that's the king part, right? There's rules for mass combat. Really, really fucking good. Alexander Macris wrote this. He also wrote a book called Arbiter of Worlds, which is take on how to DM, which I find is a fantastic book. It's going to be in my master list later, guys. And last but not least, in terms of the more intensive rule sets, Rob Connolly, a friend of mine, Majestic Fantasy RPG, picked that up. He has the basic rules out now, and he's working diligently on the complete rule set. Rob will get it done. He's a slow writer, but he gets his shit done. He also has some other things that he put out I'll talk about later, too, that one of them, which I edited. And it's one of the few books that I can honestly say that when I read it, I learned more how to be a better DM, and that's after 40 years of DMing. It was a good damn book. Honorable mention, again, goes to what we were talking about earlier, DCC. Where the hell does that fit in? It's not quite old school. It's not a retro clone. It's a little bit different, right? It's a little bit gonzo, keeps the old school principles, but Dungeon Crawl Classics RPG. Well worth checking out and investing in, guys. All right? So those are the rule sets, the original ones and the newer ones. And again, links are all on the link page. All right? Thank you very much. The next thing we're going to come up with is adventures modules. All right? We're going to talk about that in a second.